So Adia, here we are this afternoon, and I know we're going to launch into our monitoring webinar today, and we're very excited about it. And you and I talked before opening up today, and before we get into our slides, we really want to acknowledge that we know that we have a lot of grantees that are enduring, and our families and staff of grantees enduring a lot of stress. We've got lots of hurricane aftermath to cope with. We know that some states and some grantees have been experiencing wildfires. And whatever we say today about what we're rolling out and how excited we are, we want to acknowledge that we need to make, and we acknowledge this, accommodations for any grantee in any part of the country, or sovereign nations or territories that have experienced damage and have recovery to go, that we'll figure that out. This is really our rollout today, because we want the country to understand what this AMS 2.0 is.
Yeah, I think everybody's in our hearts and mind, and from a monitoring perspective, we've really looked over the schedule. We've tried to find programs that may be affected by any natural disaster, and our monitoring event coordinators are reaching out to folks and really trying to make sure that we make the accommodations that are the right ones for people.
So I think with that, if you can tell us what we're going to be doing over the next hour.
Well, we're going to be talking about the enhanced monitoring system, and we're really going to dive into making sure that people know what we're doing, think about what Align Monitoring, what we're calling Align Monitoring 2.0 looks like, and that, we give them all the information that gets them ready for the reviews in the FY 2018 monitoring season.
Okay, let's go.
All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to the FY 2018 monitoring webinar. We're so happy to be here again, and we know that you've been looking forward to hearing all about what FY 2018 monitoring is going to look like. My name is Adia Brown, and I'm here with Ann Linehan.
Thanks, and I'm happy to be here with you, Adia, and look forward to walking through the slides. I know people are really eagerly anticipating the rollout. So hopefully,
I've been hearing all kinds of questions about it all year long.
Oh, I know. Yeah. I know.
So hopefully this is going to be a lot of fun. So you want to just jump into it, Ian?
Sure.
Okay. So today, during this presentation, we're going to give you a lot of information that we hope is going to be extremely helpful to all the grantees. We're going to talk to you about the background and what was the road to what we're now calling the Aligned Monitoring System 2.0. I'm going to introduce it to you. Ann's going to give me a lot of help. There's things that we know that you want to know, and we're going to tell you about them. We're going to also tell you about something called focus areas, and we hope that in this presentation we can make things crystal clear. But you have an opportunity to ask us lots of questions, and after you see this presentation, we'll be back to give you a live Q&A so that we can talk about things that you want to know more about.
So before we switch to the second slide, Adia, I'm wondering if we could kind of take away the mystery of that focus area 1 and focus area 2, because we used to call them what?
We used to call them content areas for a long time. So we called them content areas. It was all about us coming out and doing things like fiscal, ERC, which we'll still be doing. But now we're actually combine them together in some focus areas, and we'll be telling people a lot more about it later on in the presentation.
And so the focus area 1 and 2 actually will be transformed into the protocols that will be posted, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So these guys should be seeing the protocols today, and so we hope that they'll be looking at them and that they'll have lots of questions.
Okay. So let's move on to the next slide, and really I think just reiterating, we had to do obviously the undertaking of the revisions to the monitoring the monitoring process, really because we had new performance standards, first time in 20 years, complete overhaul. So we were really forced into thinking about how we would do monitoring that both aligned with the new performance standards. But I think the other thing that's also important to keep in mind, we now have every grantee in the country that is on a 5-year grant period.
Exactly.
So I think it gave us, it's a dual alignment with both the Head Start performance standards and the 5-year grant period.
A lot of change. I mean, I think that grantees have really, they've really done a great job of dealing with all the changes and thinking about sort of how they want to think about being in 5-year grants, and also really handling the new performance standards.
So I think the other thing that we would want to mention also with the new standards, and it's interesting because it's going to be pervasive, I think, throughout the new AMS 2.0, the standards gave grantees flexibility, shifted a lot on local determinations, and also, an increase towards performance, innovation, and outcomes. In many ways, one could say that's fantastic. Everybody loves that, and grantees, by and large, love the flexibility. However, there's probably going to be a lot of nervousness, because when you can't call up the federal office and say, what's the answer to this? I think people get a little bit nervous, because will they be making the right answer?
Right.
And I think, like our monitoring system now, there may not be a right answer, because the right answer may differ from grantee to grantee depending on what their data tells them.
And I think that's going to make grantees really nervous. But I think just thinking about all of the flexibility that folks have gotten in the new standards, the monitoring system had to shift so that we could also understand that flexibility. And so it's going to be a really new way to look at programs.
And I think, the other thing I thought about in looking at this slide, and you and I have lots of conversations about this, and you'll talk about it a little bit later, but we both read lots of monitoring reports. And because we have in the past been compliance driven, the only things you sort of read about are the things that the grantee is not doing well.
Right.
So the monitoring reports, while compliance is extremely important and will continue to be important, it doesn't give you a full picture of what the grantee's profile is.
And grantees have talked about that for years, really wanting the Office of Head Start to give them that full picture that the monitoring reports just couldn't do, because we just, it was always about compliance. And I think this new system gives us a lot more opportunity to think about progress and outcomes and really how the grantees do their work.
And the difference between grantees.
Yeah, I think so. So people are really probably, their appetites are very wet, and they really want to know, what is this new AMS 2.0? And so one of the things that grantees really need to know about AMS 2.0 is that it's a system that is much more streamlined than what we've done in many years. We're trying to make sure that we're efficient and that we're really focused on how programs use their data and what outcomes they're getting during the 5-year period. And so in this process, there's 3 reviews that grantees have to worry about, or they have to think about. And so and grantees are going to all be out there like, well, what are the 3 reviews? What does that look like? And so, of course, we're still doing class. Class is a major part of the monitoring system. We're going to continue it, and all grantees will have the opportunity to experience a class review. But then we have 2 additional reviews, and we're calling them Focus Area 1 and Focus Area 2. And those 2 reviews happen for the grantees at differing times. One happens closer to the first year, and one happens closer to the third, and I'll tell grantees a lot more about that later on in the presentation. But they're really a combination of things that we used to do in a much more streamlined way. So people will ask, well, why these changes? The Office of Head Start is always trying to be very innovative, really trying to meet grantees' needs. We listened to grantees, and one of the things we heard about our last iteration of monitoring was that the burden of the multiple reviews was really a lot for grantees. And so in trying to plan this new system, we tried to reduce a lot of that burden. So we're no longer coming to grantees, especially grantees who are agencies that have multiple grants every year. So we really have streamlined the system. We've increased, what we're doing in the alignment of monitoring of the performance standards, and we just want to make sure that grantees get some value from this new system.
Why don't we go on? So, looking at the who, the when, and the where, we really want grantees to benefit from the experience. I think you're going to talk a little bit further in the presentation about the opportunity for grantees to really demonstrate how they're performing and what tools they're using to measure their progress and track their progress. We also want this to be beneficial to regional offices. I mean, this is something that is not, we do not want this to be considered separate, unattached to the entire oversight, because we know our program specialists and our grant specialists, every day are interacting with grantees.
Absolutely.
So we want, as part of this process, to capitalize and leverage on what they know, but we also want this process, the outcomes of this process, to benefit their continued work. And we are going to begin, class reviews begin first in October, and Focus Area 1 and 2 will begin in November, so that's really right around the corner, isn't it?
It's close, very close.
And again, today I think it's sort of like putting your toes in the water and just kind of testing it out. But can you tell us more about what's going to be happening in terms of follow-up?
Yeah, I think that grantees are really going to have lots of opportunity to learn more, and we're going to open up an expo again. Grantees really like our virtual platform. They really understand it. They like getting in there. We're going to put lots of tools and tips, and the protocols are there. So grantees really have a great opportunity to look into the system and understand what we're doing before we come out to do it. So let me tell grantees a little bit about sort of the differences, because people, they're probably anxious to know, well, what's different about this, about AMS 2.0 than our last version of the Align monitoring system? Well, first of all, one of the things that we really want to stress about this new system is that it's progressive. Almost every iteration of monitoring that we've had thus far has really been about a snapshot. So we go to a grantee, we see them for a week, and we take a picture, and we say, okay, we think we know enough, and we can really understand this grantee. However, we know a lot about grantees, and we know that really what we want to do is understand grantees across the entire 5 years. So the two focus areas give us an opportunity to look at them at the beginning, sort of when they're starting and what all of their foundation is about, and also look at them sort of when they're almost to the end to see how well they've done. And like you said, this is not a disconnected monitoring review. So all in between, the regional offices are doing their regular oversight, they're understanding that grantee, and it's helping us to understand the progress and what they're doing. Also, this new system is not as broken up as the last one. So the last system, we came out and we did content area reviews to grantees, and we separated them, thinking that it would be a great idea. And for some grantees it was, but for a lot of grantees, it really didn't work. So now, when we do the focus areas, we combine together content, and we talk to the grantee about things so that they're connected. The last version of this system was all on-site. This system has some components that are off-site. So focus area 1 is really, it's a conversation and a call with the grantee rather than an on-site review. And also, we used to try to go out and see every classroom. We tried to get to, in some programs, 830 classrooms, and that was a lot. And it was a lot for the grantee. Just the burden of trying to get the team around, the travel, the logistics. We did learn a lot about programs, but we also learned that we don't need to see as many classrooms.
And when you said, the first one is, it's not on-site, it's a call.
Yeah.
Well, it's a series of calls, right? We don't want to think it's a quick phone call.
It's not a quick phone call. It's a series of calls.
Yeah.
And later on, we talk about focus area 1. I'll talk about what the series looks like. But it is a series of calls. And the on-site visits are samples now. So we look at the grantee, we look at the size, and we try to take a reasonable sample to see how many classrooms we should go to visit. This review, as you said earlier, compliance is always important. We want to make sure that people comply with the Head Start performance standards, but the Head Start performance standards have changed, and they talk a lot about program progress, a lot about outcomes based on your data. The system is going to help us to do that. And finally, we still will do targeted reviews.
Absolutely.
They're really important. They really help us, when we need to see a grantee and there's some immediate need. Targeted reviews give us the ability to go in and look at things right away.
Great. I have to chuckle, and I've said this publicly several times. I think this system, because we're focused on dialogue and exchange and grantees demonstrating, it really, in some ways, it was a lot easier, right, as a grantee to kind of, you figured out exactly what documents people were looking at and what they wanted to know, and you'd kind of get, so many grantees you go in and they'd have a whole room set up for the reviewers, coffee table, Dunkin' Donuts, close the doors, and the reviewers would spend.
See you on Friday.
Right. So
yeah,
really,
absolutely.
and we know that paper only tells part of the story.
Only tells.
And that is true for grantees that maybe not be good in paper. They may not be great in paper, but they could certainly demonstrate and show you in other ways that they understand their children and families that are making progress. And other programs that have great paper doesn't necessarily mean that those papers are in action.
Are reflective of what they're actually doing. We had some great experiences with grantees when we were figuring out sort of, how to do this. And grantees really got on board. We did lots of pilots. We had a lot of conversations with them. And we found that at first it was a little disconcerting for grantees, sort of like, well, wait a minute, you don't want those binders, you don't want to go in the room. But as time, as people started to understand it, we really do get a chance to see how grantees really operate their programs. And grantees are always interested in the schedule. They always want to know, when are you coming to see me? You know, when is all of this going to happen? And so, you know, we put this slide up just so that people can really get a clear picture of the 5 years that they have their grant and everything that's going to happen. So for lots of grantees, the first time that we're going to talk to them is Focus Area 1, and it should generally happen in their first year. The next time that we want to come out to see grantees, you can see from this picture, is later. So at the very end of your second year or your third year, we'll come out and do Focus Area 2.
So I know we get people in the audience going, but I'm in my 4th year, I'm in my 5th year, or I'm in my 2nd year. What do you...
Absolutely. There's going to be so many people that ask that question. And so, you know, grantees are in various stages right now. They're everywhere. So there's some grantees, they've already they're already in their 3rd and 4th year. So we have grantees who are in their 3rd and 4th year, and they completed the monitoring system.
Right.
They did all the reviews, they did everything.
So they may not enter into this system until their first year of their 5 year, their next 5 year.
That's right. So they won't enter until their first year comes up again. So there's other grantees who are in the system and they're in their 3rd year and they're saying, well, what's going to happen to me? I'm not in my 1st year, I'm not in my 3rd year, I haven't finished all my reviews yet. What's going to happen? And so those grantees are going to get a Focus Area 2 this year. And so just so that grantees feel comfortable, one of the things that we're doing that's special to this year is that when we give a Focus Area 2, we're going to do a brief Focus Area 1. As we talk in this presentation, people will understand why that's important. Focus Area 1 is really about the background, and we want to make sure that we get that even for the grantees who are sort of entering quote-unquote late. We also are going to continue to do class. You can see that it can happen between your 2nd and 3rd year. That's always been the way that it is. And then grantees, you know, we've always took the 4th year to give some determination and your notification of whether or not.
So that 4th year, we're looking at the data that we've collected.
That's right.
And then notification clearly would be the notification under the designation renewal system, whether or not a grantee would have to recompete for funding or whether or not they would be eligible for a 5-year automatic renewal.
Exactly. So hopefully grantees, and I know grantees will take this chart and they'll memorize it, and we also will send out for all grantees, we continue to send out the 60-day letters so they know when their review is going to happen. We also send out the customized letters so that they know that they're on the schedule for this year, and grantees should be getting those very shortly.
Great. So let's focus a little bit on Focus Area number 1.
Okay.
And really, this is a big shift because this is and we want to share with you what you should expect from the reviewers. And this is, we have talked to the reviewers. I mean, we're setting a very high bar for the level of interaction and knowledge that reviewers will bring to Focus Area 1 review. As Adia said, this will be a series of discussions that will be mutually sort of scheduled. And what do you call those planners in the...
We have the monitoring event coordinators, the mix.
The mix, okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this is not something that's going to be done by surprise. I mean, it's because when we have these conversations, we want to have the right people at the table. And that, having the right people at the table is really going to be the determination of the grantee. If we know that the reviewer is going to be talking about, children's services.
Children's services, family engagement.
Then you want to have all those people available in order to contribute to the conversation.
Absolutely.
And I think what is different about this, and I think one criticism that, we heard throughout every iteration of monitoring is, reviewers come in and they don't know us. I think that we made efforts over the years, particularly in our tribal communities, because just because you've been to one tribe doesn't mean that you're going to know anything about the next tribal community. I think that's also true with non-tribal grantees. We now have a lot of information in HSES. We have prior monitoring reports, audit reports. We have PIR data. We have the grant application, which is a wealth of information because it really tells you all the aspirations and the goals and how the grantee is planning to implement its services. So the reviewers are going to have to do their homework, and they're going to have to, I don't want to say plow through, but they are going to be responsible to familiarize themselves with that information. So when they engage in the conversation, you're not having to say what state you're in and how many children you serve and what did your last monitoring say or what is your PR information.
Right. It's really a way to help reviewers engage in a real conversation with the grantees. Once the reviewers know about the grantees and they really are thinking about, all the information that they have read and they've assessed and they've analyzed, this actually helps to develop the questions that they want to know. And so this is why it's so important that reviewers do their homework and that they really engage with the grantees. And we're spending lots of time, we spent lots all summer long really training reviewers to think about how to do that.
And I do think, and we'll mention it again, but we usually talk about a script, and I think the script gave grantees some level of comfort, because we would always say the reviewer can't deviate from the script.
Right.
And what we've realized is that's limiting, because what programs would always say is, but why didn't they ask me this? Or why didn't I have an opportunity to share this?
Right.
And I think this system has the flexibility and the fluidity that you go where the grantee takes you.
Absolutely.
And I think the other thing about Focus Area 1, it really is, to me, also establishing a solid link with our training and technical assistance network, as well as with our program and fiscal staff. As we talked throughout the several months, this is an opportunity where we're really understanding what is it that you said you were going to do? Why did you make those determinations? Clearly based on community assessment and a lot of other data. If this is a first-year grant application, grantees have probably put a lot of thought into it, a lot of information, a lot of analysis. So it's an opportunity for us to basically establish the foundation of how the grantee built its house.
Yes.
And I think it also allows us an opportunity, because we know that some grantees are not always at the same level of other grantees. We want to be proactive, and if there's a red flag, we want to be able to say, hey, I'm not sure that this might, have you thought about this direction?
That's right.
Or does this data really suggest that you don't need transportation? So it's an opportunity to give the grantee some feedback, not to come down in a punitive way, but to say, gee, I wonder if you've thought about this, and then it's up to the grantee. Because we know the best laid plans sometimes need to have course corrections. So we're hoping out of this, and if the grantees can further reflect, or they can say, you know what, we are so confident we're forging ahead, or it's information that we could be sharing with them that they might say, we could use some extra help in this area. Or we've never provided this model before. Or we have a new accounting system and we're a little bit uncertain about how it's going to work out. Or we have brand new board members. And there's so many things that could emanate from this that we hope are going to help the grantee also inform the regional office. And the regional office can then get to determine, hey, is it something that we might want to assist the grantee with? Or is this something we might want to deploy some TA resources?
Absolutely.
Now, that's not to say if something egregious occurs, we would certainly issue a finding, but this is really trying to really engage the grantee at the beginning of a 5-year process and be value added.
I couldn't have said it better, Ann. I mean, I feel like the amen choir over here.
Okay.
So let me tell grantees just a little bit about Focus Area 1, and I mean, you just laid it out for them so well. When you look at this slide, we really want to think about what are the strengths and needs that the community that the grantee serves. It's really the building block. It's why you decided to build your program, why you have it in the areas that you do. It's the children that you decided to serve. These are all the things that we're figuring out here. We're also looking at your staffing and your patterns and how that meets the design that you set out to do in the beginning of your program. And again, just like you said, if we do it here, we have an opportunity to say, hey, looks great, looks like you have a good composition of staff, or, are you thinking about things like professional development? Or are you thinking about getting a health coordinator if you don't have one? And it's not to be punitive, but it's really to think about how is the grantee designing their program, and what might they need to do to improve so they can do really well along the way.
I think one of the things, and I'm so glad you've got the little piggy there with the
little piggy bank.
The piggy bank.
Yeah.
Because I think programs have gotten so sophisticated in this, but I think from the program side, you sort of think about the design, you look at the data, you develop what options, you develop your staffing plans, and then you need to look at that. Do you really have the budget that's going to support the attainment of the goals that you've set forth.
That's right.
So I really think making that connection with does the capacity of the design and the build of the budget, is it going to support the success on the service side?
And grantees think about that. They write it
Yeah.
in their grant application. This is our opportunity to talk to the grantee about it and really for us make those connections. And sometimes if the connection wasn't made, it's a great opportunity for the grantee to think about it and say, hey, you know, this is a place where maybe I might want to shift some dollars or do something different. And we also want to know what governance looks like very early on in the program. How is your governing body really thinking about the program, planning with you, starting off, making sure that you have the resources and the finances that you need to move forward? And, you know, how are they, how do they begin to understand their roles and what they need to do as a governing body?
And I also think in Focus One, you're really touching on, I was thinking about this, sort of the governance. I think it sends a message to the board early on that they really matter. Their role is incredibly important because we're engaging them at the outset. I think sometimes, you know, if we run into struggles with a grantee, it might be the third or fourth year of a grant and we've never engaged with the board.
Absolutely.
So, and again, that's not to say, and I want to keep reiterating, we've got program specialists in the regions and fiscal specialists who are doing that level of engagement all the time. And I think this should just be a parallel process that supports it.
It should definitely support it. And we also begin here and start thinking about your education approach and your health approach and your approaches to family and community engagement. All of those things are very important at the very beginning to see how the program laid it out. What are some of their goals? What are some of the things they're thinking about? You know, what curriculum have they decided to use? Lots of things here where we can start to have great conversations with the grantee and really understand how they're starting.
And I think about the whole curriculum discussion, you know, in many cases, programs may have curriculums that meet the criteria of the research-based, but they may need some enhancement because of some special, need within their community or their population. So, again, it's an opportunity, I think, to have an exchange to add value at the beginning of the process instead of coming in midpoint.
Right, I think so too. So people are probably really wondering, what does it look like? And earlier they heard me talk about the fact that this is an off-site review, and it's a conversation, but it couldn't last for up to a week. So there's a series of 45-minute.
Not a straight week. Not 24 hours.
No. There's a series. That's a long time. I don't think anybody would have the stamina, but there's a series of anywhere between 45 minutes and 120-minute calls that we plan with the grantee during that week. We give the grantee sort of carte blanche to tell us, you know, what fits for them, you know, who can we talk to when, and we give them plenty of time to set up the interviews and the conversations, and we invite them to bring whomever they think is the right person to sort of talk to us about the topics. So we're hoping that it's going to be a good experience for the grantees and that they really get an opportunity to share things, both good and challenges, that they're thinking about at the beginning of their program operations, and think about it in a way that we can help them in the future.
Well, and again, let's just talk a little bit about the benefits, and I think we've really have gone over them, but I think the whole issue here is an early look, right? And I think it's so important, again, to get in as soon as possible, to have the dialogue, and to provide feedback. We see it as, and I know that you worked with external stakeholders and groups that were interested as we were making the revisions, and one of the things I think they were so hopeful about was this early exchange.
I think so.
So I think an early look is important. Again, to I think not only validate the direction grantees are going in, but also give them support or pushing and probing a little bit if we think the direction may be problematic for them. Clearly, any feedback, the ongoing feedback to our regional offices is important. And again, as you talk about the progressive, let's not just go in there midpoint when it's really too late to, we care about, when you think about having, whether it's babies or preschoolers, that's a long time in their lifespan. So we want things to be as right as they can be from the first year.
Beginning. Yeah, I think that's right. So, Ann, we've talked so much about Focus Area 1. I know people are going to be excited to hear about Focus Area 2. And so why don't we go into telling about Focus Area 2 and sort of what they can expect there?
Okay, great. Well, we talked a little bit about even Focus Area 1, that it's not this script, this rigid script that folks are following. But we want to be clear. I think with the prior protocols, people always had a sense of comfort about the transparency. And what we want to assure folks today is, whether it's Focus Area 1 or Focus Area 2, the protocols for those areas will actually describe the exact areas and standards that are going to be addressed throughout the conversation.
Absolutely.
So the transparency is there.
It's still there, and I think people will, they'll find some comfort because the topics are there.
Right.
And under the topics, there are things that the reviewer will talk about. This is not a random conversation.
Right.
Every reviewer, we also have to think about consistency across grantees. And so every reviewer has topics, and they have places and standards that they're going to talk to the grantee about, and the grantee is going to be well aware of what each of those are.
And again, and it's funny because if we have folks out there that know the class and the domains, and I always think about that third domain, how difficult that is, but how important it is to children's learning. And the same thing with reviewers when we're out there. If a grantee says something that's interesting, we want reviewers to ask a follow-up question.
Absolutely.
And not let it drop.
Yeah.
Because I think programs may not have felt the freedom to be as expressive as we're asking them to be about the way in which they're implementing services, supporting staff, conducting observations, whatever it is. We think that grantees have a lot to say, that this system will really promote that level of expression with freedom. Yeah. And again, I'm the oldie in the room here, so I go back to the Savvy where you actually did check the compliance box, right?
Yeah. I wasn't back there.
All right. Well, but there still was kind of a checking the box. How many plugs were covered up, the electrical
how much
things,
mulch is on the playground.
And I think that shift is certainly going to be welcomed. And again, I think you could say, here's our safety checklist, and this is what we do every day.
Right.
But wouldn't it be great to walk through a center and actually see that in motion?
It's interesting that you say that, Ann, because that's exactly what we're going to do. I think that grantees have really, as we said earlier, used to us asking them for the checklist, and we would go over the checklist and say, okay, you have a checklist. But this new system is really about the grantee sort of walking us through and showing us, how do you use that checklist? What are the trends from that checklist? And what are the things that you're actually doing to make things improved for kids based on what you do every day?
I think the same thing is very true. And the other example that I would use that I think is so important is the whole family partnership and the family engagement. I think there was such a heavy emphasis that programs gravitated to, even though it was the word written was in there at some point, the written partnership agreement. But there is so much more. I mean, the sort of that agreement is just the beginning of that relationship with the family and parent. And I even think the opportunity for parents to be able to articulate, as well as staff, how they feel engaged in the program or how programs engage parents is much more freeing. And I think there are going to be many more opportunities for programs.
And the standards really do cover a lot about how parents get involved, how parents are engaged across all of the services.
Right.
And we tried to mirror that in the new protocol, just making sure that we included parents in health and in education and all the places where we think that parents should feel welcome and that they should have an opportunity to participate in the program. So we tried to create a protocol that was very systemic, that it really wasn't about just whether or not there was a plug plugged in or whether or not there was one tripping hazard, but really about how is the program managing itself, how are they thinking about the information that they know about children and families, and how are they using that to really improve and make things great for kids.
And I think, so the last little bullet here says, they could be asking questions across several areas, within a 15-minute or 20-minute conversation, but it is all linked together. I mean, if you're talking about surveying a special population of children, you might be curious if the demographics have shifted in the community. How did you go about recruitment? Are there specific health areas? Are there differences in the families? Maybe it's a population that the primary language is not English. So what is your planned coordinated approach to supporting those families across all those areas?
Well, it was interesting when we actually tried this with grantees. Grantees really are used to sort of going down the protocol and going question by question by question. And we would have these conversations and people would get so excited about their work. They would start showing us what they did. And then we would say, oh, that's great. We think we have it all. And they would say, you didn't ask all the questions. And we would sort of repeat back to the grantees and say, no, here's where you answered all the questions. And they were surprised at how well people listened and how important the conversation was for us to really understand exactly what they're doing. So focus area 2 is really about the opportunity for the grantee to demonstrate their ability to do several things. One is we're very interested in how grantees track and assess their program's performance. So what does the program know about how well they're doing? How well are you actually, providing services to families? Are they feeling welcome in your program? How well are you using your curriculum? Are you implementing it the way that you had anticipated it? Are people getting the professional development that they need? This protocol is also very focused on how they're using data. So grantees will be very interested to know that we're going to come out, we're going to actually look at your data and look at how you use it, when you use it, who uses it, who gets it, and how does it actually help you make informed decisions about your program.
I think one of our colleagues, I think it might have been in Region 1, did a search in the new performance standards, how many times the word data was used.
Yeah.
I want to say it was high 60s or low 70s, but clearly, and that's been a huge shift in the performance standards that I think is reflected here.
And I think that it's going to be really interesting for grantees because when we were only focused on compliance, we were looking at very widgety things in the standards, just one standard after the other. But the new standards are so woven together, and data is such an important part of how grantees really operate their program that this had to come up as a high priority item in the new monitoring system.
And again, when we think about program performance, and I don't want to underscore the progress and performance of children is so incredibly important. And it's really, while we want children to progress leaps and bounds, what's important is the program really has the data to understand and explain how the children are progressing. It's not that they went from here to here in 3 months. It's how do you know that they did progress? And if there are some gaps there, what are you doing to support those kids who are not progressing in a way that is more typically developing? I think the other thing about program performance, so we think about program performance, we think about early child performance of children. I think about program performance in other ways, like if you have 5 facilities, how are you performing around the upkeep and the security of those facilities? So it really cuts across. Program performance is huge.
It's very big. And it cuts across many different topics for the grantee, but it all connects together. It's funny, it seems huge, but it all matters. If you have facilities that really aren't being kept well, it's very hard for teachers to teach there. It's very hard for children to, be successful in those facilities. So everything goes together. And this protocol is very interconnected and woven together.
I think the other thing that I would like to make a point here, and, we talk about the new sort of qualifications for some staffing, and we know that some programs are still even struggling to meet the requirements in the Act, particularly sometimes in communities with infant toddler teachers. And what we expect, and again when we talk about program performance, if you find that you have some areas that, you're striving and you're not quite there, what are you doing to support staff to meet certain credentialing? Do you have a professional development plan? Is there a goal in terms of a timeline? Are you providing the observations and the supports that teacher needs to be successful? And so it really is looking at the performance of the grantee. What are they doing in the attainment, not only of their own goals, but in either continuing maintaining with the performance standards or striving to meet those performance standards. It's the effort and the intentionality and the planning that I think is important for programs to be able to articulate.
And I think over time in this system, people are going to get better at that, right? And so, right now people are going to be thinking a lot about implementing the standards and how they do that. When we go out and we see programs in Focus Area 2, they've already sort of been doing this for a couple of years now. And so we will see those programs and we'll see sort of how well they've been able to for example, use their professional development systems to encourage teachers to implement the curriculum, to help them with strategies that they need to think about in the classroom with children, to think about how family workers are really now building those relationships with families and getting them the services that they need. So Focus area 2 is really sort of the proof in the pudding focus area. In focus area 1, we learn all these wonderful things about their foundation, but when we get to focus area 2, it's really about understanding, is the grantee doing those things that are expected in the standards, and also whether or not, if they're not, what type of progress they're making.
I think the other thing that this area will allow us to do that I think we have, I want to say fallen short, but have not had the kind of information consistently. I think this information gathering, because we're going to be gathering within categories, within buckets from every grantee, right? It doesn't have to be exactly the same way, but we're going to know about the curriculum. We're going to know about the systems that are used to measure progress. We're going to know about assessments. It's going to give us a better national profile, because over time, as we're collecting this information, we're going to be able to roll it up in the aggregate and be able to articulate better, be it to Congress, be it to our administration, a better picture of the overall performance of Head Start programs.
And you know, I think sometimes people always know that in monitoring, we never monitor all the standards.
Right.
And earlier this year, you sent out a great letter to grantees, really letting them know that there are some standards that we're not going to monitor this time. And we know that there are things that people are still working on around curriculum. We know that, you know, duration is still a topic that grantees are working on. And so those are things that are not in this monitoring protocol. We're not looking to see whether or not grantees have actually completed those items yet. Grantees should continue to work on all of those things, but it's not something that we're monitoring at this time. So the standards that we chose to look at in Focus Area 2 are ones that really grantees have been working on for a very long time, and they're very familiar to the grantees, even from the standards, the last set of standards that we had.
And I think just to make you know, a clear distinction, the Head Start performance standards, which we know everyone has several copies, right? One at their bedstand. There is a compliance table at the back of the performance standards, and that compliance table denotes those standards that Adia was talking about that were not effective 60 days after the issuance of the performance standards, and I think that effective date was November 7th, 2016. And the whole front body, those are the ones that we're sort of looking at and making a determination. It's the ones in the compliance table that have dates later than that November 7th, 2016 that we're.
And I think that was a very fair decision by the Office of Head Start. It really, you know, I think it shows that the Office of Head Start is really giving grantees that opportunity to implement these standards in a high quality, effective way. And so by not monitoring the ones that are in the appendix, we're continuing to let grantees sort of grow in those standards and make, you know, really good progress. So Focus Area 2, people will want to know a lot about the methodology that we're going to use, and we've talked a lot about sort of the conversations that we want to have with grantees. These are going to be really important conversations. We're using them as a tool to help us understand and gather information. We want to look at grantees' data, and one way that we're going to do that is through something that's going to be a little new in this system. It's called a data tour. So rather than the grantee setting up a bunch of binders, giving us those Dunkin' Donuts, putting us in a room with coffee and saying, see you on Friday, what the team is going to do is actually walk through data tours with grantees. And we're going to talk to you about the data that you use every day to actually provide services to children. And so it's not really about us trying to interpret the data for you. It's about you showing us your data and showing us what your interpretation of it is, how you use it regularly, and how you use it with your staff, your governing body, and with parents to make differences in your program.
So if I were the ERC manager or the health manager, might I find a reviewer sitting down next to me at my computer and saying, hey, take me through the system where you know the children are up to date on their EPSDT schedules, or you've identified a child in a screening with a special needs, and that child's been referred out. Is that so? It could be something as simple as that.
It's very simple, and it looks just like that. When we did some pilots, I'll tell you an interesting story. We went out and we did exactly that with grantees. And when we first went, we thought that we knew what tool the grantee would be using. It was attendance. And so we had a spreadsheet and an Excel. We said, well, you know, fill this out and give us the information. And the grantee was very willing to do that. But when we sat down and talked to them, they said, well, that's really not how we do it at all. And we said, okay, well, let's rip this up and throw it away and show us how you really do it. And the grantee took us into their office, and they had a phenomenal amount of data on attendance and when children were there and when they weren't, and which parents they called and who was absent for a few days and what follow-up they did and what family service worker was working with that family. It was amazing to actually see that, but just sort of taking away the barrier of we want this specific document or this specific thing, and sitting down with people at their desk gave them the freedom and the opportunity to really show us their stuff. Right. And so it worked really well. The other thing that we're going to do is a center and classroom observations. We've done those for a long time, and we're going to continue to do
different than the class observation.
Different than the class observation. These are ones where we have, and people will ask me this, like how many reviewers and who's going to come out. And in this system, we generally have 3 reviewers, depending on the size of your program. If average programs get 3 reviewers. If you're larger, there'll be more because we have to cover more classrooms and cover more staff. But in general, we'll have a fiscal reviewer and 2 Head Start reviewers. And those reviewers will be versed in early childhood education, family engagement, and health. They'll work together with you in the program to really get a clear understanding. They go out to do the visits. And grantees really need to know that when we go out to do the classroom observations, we want you to come with us. You're our guide. We talk to you ahead of time to really talk to you about what will we see in the classroom? What's the data you have about this classroom? What is the teacher like in this classroom? So we ask those questions up front.
The teacher's very nervous because she just started last week.
The teacher is very nervous. People can tell us that. The teacher just started last week, and so we want to hear those things. We also want to hear if she started last week, what are some of the supports you're giving for this teacher? So we ask tons of questions before we go out to visit the classroom. Then when we're there, we ask the guide to tell us what we see. What are we looking at in this classroom? What's happening here? How is the teacher using the curriculum? And so we watch it, we talk, and then we take notes and we do that observation. But what grantees also have to know is that we then talk to the teacher. So we spend about 10 or 15 minutes talking to the teacher, asking her, how are you using the curriculum? How are you working with children? How are you individualizing? What type of professional development have you gotten? So the observation is really not this, it used to be we kind of went in with our computers and we didn't say anything and we just took notes. It's very engaging now, and it really is a partnership with the grantee to understand what's happening. And then we do a fiscal analysis, and it's a lot of fun to do. The grantee has an opportunity, the fiscal staff has an opportunity, just like the program staff, to talk to us about how they operate fiscal. What does their fiscal system look like? What is, is it automated? It should be. What's the capacity of the staff? And really, how do they use the budget to help the program meet its goals? And so it's really not about us. We used to come in and do tons of transaction testing.
But we still will,
and we will still do transaction testing. We just don't do it, we don't do sort of the blank transaction testing that we used to do. Now we have conversations with the grantee, and we do testing based on what they're telling us about their goals, their objectives, what they're planning to do, and the information that we saw. So through audits, we look at facilities. The fiscal person is now looking at facilities. So the fiscal observation and analysis is really, it's broad, and it includes program as well. So this review is 5 days. Typically it's 5 days, and I told folks the size of the team. So typically 3 reviewers.
What thought I have is someone, we've always heard the expression, and we've used it many, many times, you should be review ready every day. And what we mean is if you're running a program and know what you're doing, it should matter. And I think this approach doesn't really allow you to prepare because the answers are not all there. The answers are within the grantee.
Yes, the grantee has all the answers. If it's really about how well the grantee is providing those services. And so I think there's a lot of great outcomes for Focus Area 2. One is that this focus area is really about validating the program's progress. We know that programs will change from the time that we've seen them in Focus Area 1. So Focus Area 1, you set this foundation, it's a plan, you're going in that direction, but many things happen with programs. Like right now, for example, we're thinking in our hearts and minds about all the programs in Texas and Louisiana who absolutely their plans will change, and Florida. and St. Croix and St. Thomas. All their program plans are going to change, based on the hurricane situation that we have right now. And we've changed. We've said, we're going to push some of those reviews off. We're going to find out what the situation is and really think about, how we can best serve those programs. But things like that happen, maybe not to that magnitude in all programs. And we think about sort of how do programs change and shift. And when we come in focus area 2, it's not about necessarily validating your plan, but it's validating your outcomes and the progress that you've made along the way in meeting the performance standard and meeting your overall goals and objectives.
Well, and to see clearly folks had a plan, they had an implementation strategy.
That's right.
And it is it working, or are there course corrections?
Right.
And I think you're indicating in the world of Head Start and Early Head Start and our partnerships, there are many course corrections that occur all the time because of circumstances we can anticipate and other things that happen that are unexpected. And again, there will be reports issued.
Yep.
There will be, if there are non-compliances or deficiencies, certainly they will be included in the reports and people get that feedback. But they'll also hear about the things that the outcomes that they're achieving, their progress on performance. So it will be a much fuller picture of a grantee profile.
Absolutely. So we've kind of come to the end of our road, and it's time for me to tell people about the resources that we'll have available for them. And
we're still going to hang around and answer some questions.
Yeah, we've come to the end of the road of this PowerPoint presentation. So one of the things that we want people to know is that lots of things are going to be available both on eClick and in the Aligned Monitoring Expo. We have that every year. People get excited. It's going to launch today at 3:30, and so we hope that folks will go in there and really look at all of the tools and the presentations and everything that we have to offer for them there. And we're looking forward to being out on the road and seeing grantees throughout this entire monitoring season.
Thank you.
No problem.
And now on to questions.
Yeah, on to questions.